Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be here.
Today we are doing something that feels a bit like philosophical spelunking. We are descending into a cavern that is dark, winding, and, well, notoriously difficult to navigate.
That's a good way to put it.
We're tackling a text that has been called the Mount Everest of the Platonic canon. It has baffled, frustrated, and I think fascinated thinkers for over 2,000 years.
Oh, that is no exaggeration at all. We are walking straight into the lion's den of metaphysics today. I mean, if you think of the Republic as the big, shiny manifesto of Plato's philosophy.
Right, the grand vision.
Exactly. Then this text, this is the internal audit that threatens to bankrupt the whole system. It's a self-critique.
We are covering Plato's Parmenides, and I want to set the expectation right out of the gate. If you think you know Socrates, the wise old master who wanders around the Athenian marketplace dismantling other people's arguments with a smirk, you need to park that image at the door. Because in this deep dive, the script is completely flipped.
Indeed. In almost every other dialogue, Socrates is the predator in the intellectual jungle. He's the one setting the traps. But here, Socrates is the prey. He is the underdog. He is the one getting schooled.
And that is exactly why I'm so excited about this one. We get to see the origin story in a way. We get to see a young Socrates get knocked down.
Yeah, and it's a brutal knockdown.
So our mission today is to break down this absolute beast of a text. We're going to see the famous theory of forms, the bedrock of all Platonism, get ripped to shreds by an older master.
Completely dismantled.
And then we're going to watch a mental gymnastic routine that calls into question the very nature of reality, God, and, well, existence itself.
It's a journey from this youthful, almost cocky confidence to total intellectual collapse, and then hopefully to a much deeper, albeit stranger, understanding of how logic works, or maybe how it doesn't work.
So let's set the scene. This isn't just some dusty classroom debate. We are in Athens.
Yeah.
It's a specific time of year, right?
Yes, the setting is incredibly specific and vibrant. We are in Athens during the Great Panathenaea. This was the massive festival in honor of the goddess Athena. So you have to picture the city just alive with energy processions, sacrifices, musical contests, athletic games.
A real buzz in the air.
A huge buzz. It was a time of celebration, but also a time of intellectual exchange. And into this electric atmosphere arrived two very important visitors from Ilia, which was a Greek city in southern Italy.
And these aren't just tourists here for the street food or the chariot races.
No, certainly not. These are the heavyweights of the philosophical world. First, you have Parmenides. He's the father of the Iliatic School of philosophy.
The big boss.
The big boss. The text describes him as venerable and awful. And you have to remember, awful here is used in the archaic sense of inspiring awe, like a thunderstorm or a mountain range.
Right, something that commands respect.
Exactly. He's about 65 years old, white-haired, but well-favored, which means he still has this commanding, handsome presence. He's the grand old man of philosophy.
Okay, and who's with him?
With him is Zeno of Ilia. He's nearly 40, tall, fair, and described as very good-looking. The text calls him Parmenides' second self.
His right-hand man.
More than that. There's even a bit of ancient gossip sort of slipped in. It implies they were lovers in the past. So you have this intense, intimate bond between the master and his star pupil.
And Zeno is a powerhouse in his own right. I mean, we still talk about Zeno's paradoxes today. The race between Achilles and the tortoise, or the arrow that can never reach its target.
Precisely. Zeno was the attack dog for Parmenides' philosophy. And that brings us to the third character in this room. Sitting there, listening to them, is Socrates. But like we said, this isn't the bald, pug-nosed old man we see in the statues.
This is young Socrates.
Very young. Scholars estimate he's maybe 18 or 20 years old here. He's raw, he's enthusiastic, he's brilliant, but he's also a bit cocky. He thinks he has the world all figured out.
I love that dynamic. Yeah. It's like the old legends meeting the new kid on the block. You have the established titans of the previous generation and this upstart kid who thinks he can take them on. It's a classic setup.
It really is.
But before they start fighting, we need to understand what they're fighting about. Let's talk about the Iliatics. What was their sort of bumper sticker philosophy?
If you had to put it on a bumper sticker, it would say, all is one.
The monists.
Strict monism, yes. Parmenides argued that reality is a single, unchanging, indivisible unity. He argued that change, motion, and plurality, the idea that there are many different things in the world, are all just illusions of our senses.
Which, to be fair, sounds clinically insane to the average person walking down the street. I mean, I see cars moving.
Yeah.
I see a coffee cup. I see a microphone. I see you. That's many. I see your hand moving. That's motion. Parmenides is saying my eyes are lying to me.
Essentially, yes. He argues that logic has to override the senses. His logic goes something like this. What is simply is. It can't become something else, because to become something else, it would have to step into what is not. But what is not doesn't exist. You can't talk about it. You can't think about it. Therefore, reality cannot change. It is one frozen, eternal block of being.
So it's a static universe. Everything is just frozen in place forever. And Zeno, the younger guy, was essentially the enforcer of this view.
He was. Zeno realized that people were mocking Parmenides. They'd say, look, I can walk across the room, therefore Parmenides is wrong. It's a common sense objection. So Zeno wrote a book of paradoxes, not to prove the one directly, but to prove that the alternative is even more ridiculous. He used reductio ad absurdum.
He's the guy who says, oh, you think motion is real? Well, before you can cross the room, you have to cross half the room. And before that, half of that, and so on. You can never actually start moving.
Exactly. He's reading this treatise to the crowd when the dialogue opens. He's effectively dunking on common sense, proving that if you believe in the many, you end up with all these mathematical and logical contradictions.
And young Socrates is sitting there, listening to all this, probably fidgeting, and he decides he's not going to take it. He speaks up.
He doesn't just speak up. He challenges Zeno directly. He says essentially, I see what you're doing. You and Parmenides are running a hustle. He says, all is one, and you say the many are not. You're just saying the same thing in different fonts to trick us into thinking you've said two different things.
He calls them out. You guys are just the same person in different fonts. I mean, that is bold for a teenager talking to the most famous philosopher in the world.
It is. Zeno actually laughs and admits it. He says the book was a youthful work, written in a spirit of pugnacity to protect his master. But Socrates isn't done. He thinks he has a solution that solves the problem Zeno is posing. He thinks he can save the many without destroying logic.
And this is where he introduces his own theory of ideas, what we usually call the theory of forms. This is his big gun. But in this dialogue, it feels like he uses it as a shield. How does he think this solves Zeno's problem?
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the core friction of the first half of the deep dive.
Yeah.
Zeno says if things are many, they must be both like and unlike at the same time, which is a contradiction. You can't be both tall and short.
Right. A logical impossibility.
Socrates says, hold on, you're confusing the things with the concepts. He introduces what we can call the separation of worlds.
The separation of worlds. This is crucial.
It is. Socrates draws a line in the sand. On one side, you have the visible things. You, me, stones, wood, the messy physical stuff. On the other side, you have the abstract ideas or forms, abstract likeness, abstract unity, abstract multitude. These are perfect and unchanging.
So he tells Zeno, look, there is no contradiction in me being both one and many. I am one person. I'm one of the people in this room. But I'm also many. I have a right side and a left side, a front and a back. I partake of the idea of one and the idea of multitude simultaneously.
Exactly. He says, if you could show me that the pure idea of one is also many, I would be amazed. But showing that physical things partake of opposite ideas, that's easy. That happens all the time. He's essentially telling Zeno that his paradoxes are trivial because they apply to the messy physical world, not the pure world of forms.
He's confident. He is strutting a little bit. Your puzzles are cute, Zeno, but I have this theory of forms that explains everything. The physical world is just a mix and match of these pure concepts.
And this is the turning point. Because Parmenides, the old master, has been listening this whole time. The text says he and Zeno exchange glances and smile, not in mockery, but in admiration of Socrates' intellect. They see the potential. But then Parmenides leans in and begins the cross-examination.
And this is the mission of this deep dive. We're going to watch Parmenides take this young, confident theory of ideas and absolutely dismantle it. He's going to subject it to a crushing critique.
It is a critique so powerful that scholars are still arguing about whether Plato ever truly solved it. Parmenides is going to ask the hard questions. What gets to be a form? How do things participate in forms? And if the forms are separate, how can we possibly know them at all?
So let's get into the ring. Round one of the critique. Parmenides starts gently. He asks Socrates about the scope of these ideas.
Right. Socrates has talked about ideas of likeness and unity, these logical concepts. Parmenides asks, okay, what about ideas for noble concepts? Is there an idea of the just, the beautiful, the good?
And Socrates says, yes, absolutely, of course. Those are the big ones. That's what philosophy is all about.
Then Parmenides lowers the bar a bit. What about biological things? Is there an absolute form of man, of fire, of water?
And Socrates hesitates here. He says he's often undecided about those. He's not really sure if there is a divine eternal form of water. It feels a bit Redundant, maybe.
And then Parmenides drops the hammer. He asks, what about vile and paltry things? Is there an absolute form of hair, of mud, of dirt?
The form of mud. I love this. It sounds ridiculous. Is there a perfect, eternal, divine archetype of filth?
And Socrates recoils. He says, no, that would be absurd. Those things are just what we see. I'm afraid if I say there's a form of mud, I'll fall into a bottomless pit of nonsense.
He's embarrassed. He wants philosophy to be about truth and beauty and the stars, not about, hair trimmings and dirt on the ground.
And this is Parmenides' first lesson. He looks at him and says, you are still young, Socrates, and you still care about what the world thinks. When you find your true philosophy, you will despise none of these things.
That is such a great line. It's a call to intellectual consistency. I mean, if your theory is that everything in the physical world derives its character from a form, then mud must have a form just as much as justice does. You can't just cherry pick reality based on what looks nice on a poster.
Exactly. Logic is ruthless. If the theory works, it has to work for everything. Parmenides is warning him against the vanity of noble philosophy, but that's just a warm-up. Now he moves to the mechanics.
The mechanics of participation. This is the famous sail analogy.
Yes. Socrates claims that physical objects partake of the forms. A beautiful flower partakes of the form of beauty. Parmenides asks a very simple question. How? Does the flower get the whole form of beauty or just a part of it?
A simple question with huge consequences. Socrates tries to dodge, right?
He does. He says, well, maybe the form is like the day. The day is one and the same in many places at once. It doesn't get divided up.
It's a poetic image. He's trying to use a metaphor of light or something intangible.
But Parmenides is a logician who's not interested in poetry. He counters with a more concrete analogy. He says, it is more like a sail covering many men. If you spread a large sail over a crowd, does each man have the whole sail over him or just a part of it?
Logically, just a part. Each person is under a different piece of the canvas.
And Parmenides springs the trap. If the forms are like the sail, then they are divisible. And if the form of smallness, for instance, is divisible, then a small object only has a part of smallness. But a part of smallness is smaller than absolute smallness. So how can something become small by getting something that is less small than the small itself?
It sounds like a word game, but the implication is actually serious. If the forms are divisible, they lose their unity. They are no longer the one. They become many. They're just piles of parts.
Exactly. The perfection is gone. If the form has to be cut up into pieces to be shared by objects, it's destroyed. Socrates has no answer for this. He realizes that if he puts the forms into the world, they lose what makes them special.
So Socrates is reeling. He's on the ropes. But Parmenides doesn't stop. He hits him with the infinite regress. This is often called the third man argument in philosophy, isn't it?
Correct. This is the argument that Aristotle later famously used against Plato, and it probably originates here. It goes like this. Socrates says we recognize greatness because we see many great things, a mountain, an elephant, and our mind identifies a common form, the idea of greatness.
Right. I look at a mountain, an elephant, and a skyscraper. They're all big. My mind abstracts the form of big from them.
But Parmenides says, okay, now look at your mind's eye. You have the mountain, the elephant, the skyscraper, and the form of greatness itself. If you look at that whole group, surely they all share a quality of greatness too.
Oh, I see where this is going. If the form of greatness is itself great, then I need a new form to explain why the first form and the mountain are both great.
Exactly. You need a second form of greatness to explain the first group, but then you have a new group, the objects, the first form and the second form. So now you need a third form to cover them, and a fourth. It's an infinite chain. And
if it's an infinite chain, you never actually reach the one origin. The unity is gone. The theory collapses into an endless hall of mirrors. You never find the source.
Socrates is desperate now. He's throwing things at the wall. He tries a different angle. He says, okay, maybe these ideas aren't things out there. Maybe they are just thoughts. They exist only in our minds.
Conceptualism, it's all in our heads. A psychological escape hatch.
And Parmenides swats this away instantly. He asks, is it a thought of nothing? And of course, Socrates says, no, it must be a thought of something that exists. So Parmenides argues, if things partake of these thoughts and the thoughts are the forms, then either everything in the world is made of thoughts and thinks.
Which would mean rocks and trees are conscious, thinking beings. Which is, yeah.
Or everything is a thought that is unthinking. which is just nonsense, a contradiction in terms.
So we are back to the idea that forms are real, separate entities. And this leads to the final and I think the most devastating argument, the separation of the two worlds. I call this the master-slave argument.
This one actually gave me chills when I first read it years ago. It feels like the death of religion and philosophy combined in one logical move.
It is the most profound objection. Walk us through it.
So Parmenides argues, if the forms are absolute and separate, they belong to their own realm. Absolute mastership relates to absolute slavery. They define each other in the divine perfect realm.
Okay. And down here, in our world, a human master relates to a human slave.
Correct. The two realms are parallel but disconnected. The relative relates to the relative. The absolute relates to the absolute. Now here is the horror. God, by definition, possesses absolute knowledge.
Right. Perfect knowledge.
Therefore, God's knowledge is concerned with absolute truth. It relates to the forms. But we are in the relative world. We are imperfect copies. Therefore, God possessing only absolute knowledge cannot know us.
Because we aren't absolute. We are just the messy relative copies. To know us would be to know something imperfect, which would taint God's perfect knowledge.
Exactly. And conversely, we, possessing only relative human knowledge, cannot know the absolutes. We cannot know God or the forms.
So if Socrates' theory is true, if these two worlds are totally separate to solve the other paradoxes, then we are cut off from the divine and the divine is cut off from us. God is a stranger. Philosophy is impossible because we can never access the truth.
It is a total crisis. Parmenides has taken Socrates' hope that forms explain reality and shown that it actually makes reality unknowable and isolates us from the divine.
Socrates is just. He's knocked out. He's on the canvas. He admits it. He says, I don't see my way. He's 18, 19 years old, and his entire worldview has just dissolved in front of him.
But here is the amazing twist. Parmenides doesn't say, so give up, go be a farmer. He says, the problem, Socrates, is not that the forms are wrong. The problem is that you are trying to define these high concepts like beauty and goodness without enough training.
He says Socrates needs gymnastic. He needs a workout, a mental workout.
Yes. He says that without forms, discourse itself is impossible. If we can't classify things, we can't speak meaningfully, we can't do science, so the theory must be saved. But Socrates isn't strong enough to save it yet. He needs to practice dialectic.
And this practice is what occupies the entire massive second half of the text. And folks, when he says gymnastic, he means it. This is a mental marathon. It's incredibly dense.
It is. Parmenides describes the method. He says you must take a hypothesis, for example, if the one is, and examine all the consequences. But not just the consequences if it is true. You must also examine if the one is not.
So the positive and the negative case.
And you must look at the consequences for the one itself and for the others, that is, for everything that is not the one. It's a matrix of possibilities. If yes, what happens to A and B? If no, what happens to A and B?
And Parmenides himself kind of trembles at the task, doesn't he? He compares himself to an old racehorse who knows the course but fears the strain. He calls it a laborious game and an ocean of words.
He does. He's an old man and he knows this is going to be exhausting.
So let's wade into that ocean. We can't cover every single syllogism or we'd be here for 10 hours, but we need to understand the movement of this great exercise. It's broken down into a series of hypotheses.
Correct. And it's important to understand what Plato is doing here. He's showing that our fundamental human categories of thought-like being, one, motion, and rest are incredibly slippery. When we push them to their logical extremes, they flip into their opposites.
Let's start with hypothesis one. The assumption is, if the one is, but we're taking the one in its most strict absolute sense, the absolute one.
Right. If the one is truly one, it cannot be many. That is the definition.
Okay, makes sense.
So if it is not many, it has no parts. If it has no parts, it has a no beginning, no middle, and no end. It is limitless.
That sounds, okay, you hear that about God. God is limitless.
But wait, if it has no limits, it has no shape. It is neither round nor straight. It cannot be in a place, because to be in a place means being contained by something, which implies a distinction between the container and the contained. So the one is nowhere.
Okay, it's getting weird. It's nowhere.
And it cannot move, obviously, but it also cannot stand still.
Wait, why can't it stand still? That seems like the opposite of moving.
Because to stand still implies being in the same place over time, but we just proved it isn't in any place, so it is neither in motion nor at rest.
It's ghosting us. It's completely intangible.
It gets worse. It cannot be in time. If it is in time, it must be becoming older than itself, which implies change, but the absolute one cannot change, so it is not in time.
And if it's not in time, it never was, never will be, and isn't now.
Precisely, and if it isn't now, it doesn't exist. It has no being.
So if the one is 2-1, it doesn't exist.
That is the shocking conclusion of hypothesis 1. The one is not. It cannot be named, known, or perceived. It is a total void. By making it perfectly unified, we made it disappear.
That is a depressing start to the exercise. We basically proved that a perfect God, in this sense, implies non-existence. This is that negative theology idea, right?
Yeah.
That if you strip away all human attributes to make God perfect, you eventually strip away his existence.
Exactly. So Parmenides says, okay, that didn't work. Let's try again. Hypothesis 2. We still assume the one is, but this time we acknowledge that the word is adds something. It has being.
Okay, the one exists. That feels a lot safer.
But look at the trap. If the one exists, then we have two things. We have the one and we have existence or being.
Right, the concept and the fact of its existence.
So the one is not simple anymore. It is a compound of oneness and being. It has parts.
Ah, I see. And those parts.
Well, those parts themselves exist. So the being part has oneness and the oneness part has being. Each of those parts has parts and those parts have parts.
It explodes.
It shatters into infinite multiplicity. Suddenly the one becomes the many. It acquires number, shape, existence, and space. It touches things. It is in contact with itself and with other things.
So we went from it doesn't exist at all in hypothesis 1 to it is literally everything and everywhere in hypothesis 2.
And because it is everything, it holds all contradictions within itself. It is both at rest and in motion. It is like itself and unlike itself. It is equal to itself and unequal to itself. It is everything all at once.
This is that logic chopping that drives people crazy. But what is the point of this? It feels like he's just proving that logic destroys itself no matter which way you turn.
In a way, he is. He is showing that being and unity are these two fundamental concepts that are inextricably linked, but also deeply contradictory. But in the middle of this hypothesis, Plato drops one of the most fascinating and bizarre concepts in the whole dialogue, the concept of the moment.
The exaphanes, the sudden, the instant.
Yes. Parmenides asks, if the one changes from motion to rest, when exactly does it do it? It can't be moving when it changes, and it can't be resting when it changes. There's no time and time for the change to happen.
It has to be an instant switch, like flipping a light switch.
But an instant is not a part of time. It's a no time. It's a boundary. He argues that there must be this strange state outside of time, the sudden, where the one is neither in motion nor at rest, neither being nor not being. It is a glimpse of a reality between the frames of the film.
That is trippy. It's like the gap between the digital ticks of a clock, a place where time doesn't exist.
Exactly. It suggests that true change, true reality, might happen outside the temporal flow we experience. It is a metaphysical singularity.
Okay, so we have looked at the one. What about the others? The rest of the universe.
Right.
That's hypothesis 3 and 4.
Right. If the one exists, in the hypothesis 2 sense, the others must have a relationship to it. He argues that the others must partake of the one to be whole objects. They are other than the one, but they get their stability and identity from it.
So that sounds like the constructive theory of forms coming back in. Things in the world get their shape and nature from the one.
But on the other hand, if you remove the one entirely, as in hypothesis 4, the others crumble. Without unity, you can't even count the others. They just become a blur, a haze of unbeing, less than one.
So the one is necessary for the world to make any sense at all.
Yes, but then he flicks the script, hypothesis 5 through 8. The big question now is, if the one is not.
This is the denial. What happens if we are, for the sake of argument, atheists about the one?
Well, it gets very subtle and strange. He asks, what do we mean by is not? If we say the one is not, we are still talking about it. We have a concept of it.
Right. If I say unicorns don't exist, I still have a clear idea of what a unicorn is.
Exactly. So in a weird way, the non-existent one has attributes. It has the attribute of non-existence. It has the attribute of being unlike existing things. It can be known. It can be named.
This is the being of not being.
Yeah.
My brain hurts just saying that.
Laughs. It should. Plato is showing that language forces us to give a kind of pseudo-existence to things, even as we deny their existence. Paradoxically, if the one is not, it must imply that it changes from being to not being, so it has motion and alteration. It's a shadow world of logic.
But then in the final hypothesis, he goes for the total nihilist approach, doesn't he?
He does. He says, what if the one is not means absolute nothingness, total absence, not even a concept? Well, then nothing follows. No others can exist. Because without a one, there can be no many. If the one truly absolutely vanishes, the entire universe vanishes with it.
And that is how the dialogue ends.
It is. The final sentence is this masterpiece of ambiguity. He concludes, whether the one is or is not, it and the others, both are and are not, and appear and do not appear.
Boom. Mic drop. Everything is true and nothing is true. Good night, Athens.
That's pretty much it.
So we have to ask the big question. What was the point? We spent an hour wading through this ocean of words. Was Parmenides just hazing Socrates? Is this just a big intellectual joke? Or is there a treasure at the bottom of this deep dive?
It is definitely not just hazing. There are a few major ways to read this. One is the skepticism view. Plato is showing that human reason breaks when it tries to touch the absolute. Our logic is a tool for the physical world. When you use it on God or ultimate reality, it eats itself.
Like trying to use a ruler to measure a dream. It's just the wrong tool for the job.
Precisely. Another view, which I prefer, is that this is a kind of negative theology. By showing what the one is not and by showing all the contradictions of being, Plato is pointing toward a mystical experience. The one is beyond being. It is beyond logic. You can't capture it in a syllogism. You can only reach it by exhausting the mind until it stops trying.
And that would explain why the Neoplatonists loved this text so much. They turned it into a Bible of sorts.
They did. Plotinus and others read that first hypothesis, the one that says the one is not as atheism, but as saying the one is above existence. It is the ineffable God, something beyond all categories.
And what about the logical legacy? Its influence on later philosophy?
Oh, it's huge. This text anticipates the dialectic of Hegel, the idea that a thesis contains its own antithesis, that being and not being are in some sense identical. It anticipates Kant's antinomies, where he shows that pure reason leads to direct contradictions about the universe, like whether it is finite or infinite.
So it's a warning label for philosophy. Handle with care.
It warns us against idols of the mind, as Francis Bacon would later call them. We use these big words like force, law, substance, or God as if we know exactly what they mean. The Parmenides forces us to unpack those terms until we see the contradictions hiding inside them. It forces a deep intellectual humility.
And in a strange way, it sort of rescues the theory of forms, doesn't it? It tells Socrates, yes, your theory has massive holes, but without it, you can't think at all. So you have to learn to live in the tension.
The tension is where the thinking happens.
All right, speaking of tension and breaking the brain, I think it is time for our favorite segment.
The thought experiments.
And now for our thought experiments. Disclaimer. These are for entertainment and educational purposes only. Do not try to upload your consciousness into a logical paradox at home.
Please don't.
Okay, I want to start with one based on that terrifying master-slave argument, the separation of the two worlds. I call this the firewall of God.
Go on, I'm intrigued.
Imagine a universe that is essentially a simulation. We talk about this a lot in tech circles. There's the server level, the hardware, the code, the absolute reality, and then there's the client level, the user interface, the graphics, the physics engine that we experience.
A classic analogy for Plato's worlds, yeah.
Now, apply Parmenides' logic directly. The administrator, or God, has admin access. He knows the code, which is like the forms. We, the sims, only know the interface, the phenomena.
Okay, with you so far.
Parmenides argued that absolute knowledge relates only to absolute truth. In our scenario, the admin's knowledge of the code relates only to the server's operations. It cannot relate to the subjective experience of the sim.
You're saying the admin knows the code for love, the serotonin variables, the hormonal triggers, the behavioral subroutines, but cannot know what it actually feels like for the user to be in love.
Even deeper. To know the sim's experience, the admin would have to become a sim. He would have to log out of his admin account and log in as a user, losing his admin privileges to enter the interface. So as long as he's the admin, he is firewalled off from us, and we are firewalled off from him.
That implies a kind of deist universe, a clockmaker who builds the clock but cannot read the time on its face.
It implies that we are functionally atheistic, not because there is no God, but because the very nature of perfect reality, the server, makes it logically impossible for it to interact with imperfect reality, the simulation. If the server interacts directly with the client, it risks corrupting itself. So God must ignore us to remain God. The firewall is a necessity of perfection.
That is a chilling application of the argument. It suggests that a theory of everything that unites quantum physics, our client-side view, and singularity physics, the server-side code, is logically impossible. They can't speak the same language.
Exactly. We are trapped in the user interface forever.
Wow. Okay, I have one. Let's look at the quantum now.
Based on the sudden, The Exaphnes.
Yes. Parmenides argued that the change between motion and rest happens in a moment outside of time. Let's apply this to something like teleportation or mind uploading.
Okay, Star Trek style. Beam me up.
Right. If you step into a teleporter, you are disassembled at point A and reassembled at point B.
A terrifying thought, but yes.
If this process happens in time, there's a serious problem. Either there is a lag where you exist in two places at once, the doubling problem, or there's a lag where you exist nowhere at all, which is just death.
Yeah, we don't want either of those outcomes.
But if we follow Parmenides, the transition must happen in the Exaphnes, that sudden instant outside of time. This suggests that consciousness might not be continuous in time at all. It might be discrete.
What do you mean by that?
It suggests that you are just a series of static frames, like a film. The you of 1 second ago and the you of now are different beings. The only thing connecting them is this metaphysical moment of change that doesn't actually exist in the physical world. It's the flicker between the frames.
So we are constantly dying and being reborn in the now. And my sense of self is just an illusion created by my memory of the previous frames.
And true reality, true being, is hidden in those gaps. What we call time is just the exhaust fumes, the debris left behind by the constant collision between being and not being. The one isn't in the frames, it's hidden in the pixels we can't see.
So if I upload my mind to the cloud, I'm just hoping that this magical moment carries over my identity.
Or you are just creating a perfect copy, and the moment swallows the original you. The Parmenides suggests that personal identity through change is a logical impossibility.
Well, on that existential crisis note,
Laughs. I think we have done enough damage for one day.
this has been a journey. We started with a young, cocky Socrates getting taken down a pike. We watched his beautiful theory of forms get absolutely shredded, and then we waded through an ocean of words to see the one explode into the many and then vanish into nothing.
It is a text that reminds us that the struggle for truth is harder, stranger, and more necessary than we often think.
Parmenides suggests that without these abstract ideas, we cannot think or converse at all. Yet, if we accept them, we fall into these bottomless contradictions. We are left with the uneasy realization that human reason may be a tool that breaks when we try to use it on the ultimate nature of reality. Which brings us to our final thought. Is the one a truth we discover? Or is it a trap our language sets for us?
That is the question that keeps philosophy alive.
Thank you for listening to Talk Treatises.
Goodbye.